All right, so I guess we are live right now. Normally we can see the intro, but there's been a couple of changes today. How you doing? Welcome to the Atheist Experience. We are live. It is, what is the date today? March 6th.
That sounds right.
Yeah, I'm Matt Dillahunty. Joining me, John Iacoletti.
Hello.
The peaceful presence that that reins in the dragon that I can be on occasion.
One viewer. And I'm glad to be back because the last time I was supposed to be on was the day the internet went out.
Yeah.
And the time before that we had a special guest, and I thought that we should give the special guest a chance to be on the show, so it's good to be back. Oh, there we are.
Yeah, there we are. And there's more special guests coming up on the show in the future. As a matter of fact, today we just talked about April 10th is a lecture day for the ACA. By the way, you can find out more about the Atheist Community of Austin by going to atheist-community.org. And the show page is atheist-experience.com. Both of those websites are in the process of being completely, revamped and updated, but you can find a calendar of events there. And we have a lecture here locally that people can attend. And I've just found out that the current plan on April 10th is to have Sarah Moorhead and Neil Carter, who are in the Texas area that weekend, come down, give a lecture, and then visit on the show as well. So we're looking forward to that. Also, if you are currently or think you're currently a member of the Atheist Community of Austin, there's a good chance that you're not. As it turns out, February is the last month of the membership year, and so March begins the new membership drive. You can go to atheist-community.org and find out how to become a member there. If you're not in the Austin area and you were considering becoming a member in order to donate and contribute and support what we actually do, you can go to atheist-community.org/donate, and there's information there, because it doesn't do us any good to have members in Philadelphia who aren't going to be present to vote. I don't know why. Why do I keep picking on Philly today?
Yeah, I don't know.
I used them as an example earlier.
It's a good town.
It is a good town. So we are back live doing this. Nancy Reagan died today, or last night, I guess. I don't know which one.
And I didn't know that until somebody mentioned it at the board meeting. So.
Yeah, and obviously we've got the political elections going on. There are primaries going on all over the place. And yes, I'm well aware of what happened in not only Texas, but Travis County. On the Democratic side, Hillary won in Texas, but she didn't win in Travis County, which happens to be where I vote. But in Travis County, something else interesting happened, and that was that the GOP, I forget the name of the position that this individual holds, and he's been all over the news nationwide because he spent most of the time after being elected to be the GOP representative for Travis County talking about his book and JFK conspiracies and how he thinks the Bushes need to be in prison, and it's got everybody in quite an uproar. We've seen the news stories about it. It's interesting, but it doesn't have anything to do with what we're doing here. Yeah. Or at least not much. One thing that did happen is there's a woman who ran for the State Board of Education who won her primary. There'll be a runoff, I think, in May. And the State Board of Education is pretty significant. We've talked about it a lot. Texas is a state where the State Board of Education determines what books go into Texas schools. And because Texas is so big and so many people buy our books, this single adoption state, our books end up going out to other schools in other states as well. And yes, I'm more than a little bit disturbed that there's the potential that someone who is opposed or is procreation, anti-evolution, who thinks that Obama is nice to homosexuals because he was a gay prostitute for many years. There's something about the way she thinks that I would love to think would immediately disqualify her from being in a position where she controls what other people are going to be educated on. Unfortunately,
not in Texas.
Well, and if you live in a democracy or a democratic republic, as we all do here in the United States and in Texas, this is why it's important to vote. If this is the type of person that you want on the school board, you can go and vote for them. But I hope you stay home so that people who, have a greater respect for science and reason are helping to decide what people are going to learn. And that was my my one little mini rant for the day.
Yeah, and there's a lot of politics discussions going on our Facebook group for the show, and we have to be a little careful because the Atheist Community of Austin sponsors the show. We're a 501c3, so we can't endorse candidates. We talk about issues, so we can't tell you who to vote for and who not to vote for. We can tell you that we prefer people who respect separation of church and state and science, fact-based, reason-based education and that sort of thing, and that's what we do.
And if you don't, by the way, vote. I mean, my encouragement is for everybody to vote, irrespective of who they choose. This is like your one opportunity to really exercise your voice. When you live in a type of society where your issue, your views are represented by the people you elect. I actually, did some battles on Facebook this week with people talking about, oh, there's no point in voting, or, and I came up with some of those examples. I'll leave that there on Facebook, and we'll go ahead and get to callers. But we have heard all of the horror stories and the great news, depending on how different people look at it. And but this show is about interacting with believers, be they Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Scientologist. If you happen to be a Scientologist and you like to call in, I can't recall the last time we had somebody call in on behalf of Scientology.
I can't remember it ever happening.
I'm not sure. I'm probably on some suppressive person list, and they're just not allowed to interact with me at all. Who knows? So we'll go with, that one appears to still be being screened. And we have Connor from Glasgow.
Ah, yes, I'm on the air. Good. It's actually my third time being on the air, so that's good. I'm not Hamish, by the way. I heard him last week.
Ah, okay.
Or the 3 weeks before. But yeah, I just have a question for you, Matt. It's on the laws of logic. And I was just wondering why they're absolute.
They're not.
They're not absolute?
So I had done some videos where I talked about this, and I don't think that there's any path to absolute certainty anywhere. And if you go back and you watch the debate that I did with Cy Ten Bergencate, instead of claiming that identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle could fairly be viewed as absolutely certain, I went with maximal certainty.
Right.
And
just like theologians would sometimes go with maximal omnipotence, or as opposed to absolute. I suppose you could say that they're approaching or converging absolute certainty.
Yeah, well, the point behind that was to say, I don't see any path to absolute certainty, but if there in fact was one, whatever maximal certainty is, it may be absolute if there's some way to demonstrate it, and if there's not a way to demonstrate it, then it's just as certain as we can apparently be about anything. Right,
yeah. Well, I would say that you could argue their infallibility on the grounds that if you assume their falsehood, you prove that it's impossible to be false.
In order to prove them wrong, you have to first assume that they're true.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's the contradiction that we get to. You also find it when you start talking about Gödel's incompleteness theorem, about no system being capable of demonstrating its own truth. And so basically we've drilled back in this sort of regressive fashion until we found what are the foundations of reason, and we accept them, and I suppose we accept them tentatively as inviolable until such time as somebody can demonstrate a way that they're not true.
Right. Well, I would regard them as sort of special cases because they have this elevated status, and that they are the necessary preconditions for propositions. Like they have to be the case in order for anything to be the case, sort of thing. Like,
yeah.
So how would you said that, I think, in one video, I think it was with Matt Slick, this was an old one, 2009 or something, that without these absolutes, you can't make truth statements. Like, I'm aware of different kinds of propositions where you've got, subject, predicate, and, all that. You make truth statements about how things are.
We can make truth statements only if we define truth as that which comports with reality, or that which is consistent, deduced and derived from, let's say, the logical absolute. So it's still contextual. In a philosophic sense, depending on how you define truth, you may have no pathway to truth. And by the way, science doesn't make any sort of statement about truth. It doesn't even make a statement about certainty. It simply creates models that are the best descriptions based on the information we have, and they are considered colloquially true, just because they continue to make predictions about the world that demonstrate that, yep, we've got the best model, at least so far.
Yeah, it's like a kind of pragmatic, it relies on falsification and induction, and whereas this is more a priori, it's foundational. I'm a good old-fashioned Cartesian in that regard, so I actually do think that they're absolute, but only in the sense that in order to deny them, you have to make use of them. So
see that I agree with you. By the way, for the guys in the booth, if we can turn up the caller's volume that's being sent out here to the studio, that'd help a little bit because it's a little low. But I agree with you, and I used to talk about them as if they were absolute in the exact same context that you're talking about right now. And because I get feedback from so many different people and philosophers and other stuff, I had to change the way I talked about it because, if anything, I want clarity, and evidently it was confusing some people when you talk about how these things are absolute. Because it's kind of like the difference between a universe from nothing and creationism ex nihilo, where there's a difference in what we mean by nothing between the two of them.
Krauss, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've watched your show for about a few years. I've not been watching it since like 1997 or whatever it is. I think, is that how old it is?
I think so. This is March, so I will have been hosting the show either 11 or 12 years. 12 years by the end of this month. And the show has been on for 19, 18? Something like that. We need to do the research so that, because people like nice round numbers, we should have a celebration for our 20th anniversary. And I'm not sure that any of us pay enough attention to know exactly when that is.
Yeah, it'll be in September or October. This is our 20th season, but our first show was in the fall of 1997.
Oh, there it is in the bottom corner right here.
Yeah.
There's a season 20, episode 9, and the date. Somebody's already done the work that I'm too lazy to do.
So, could you just demonstrate, like with a reductio, how it is that assuming that they're false requires that you presuppose them? Like, laws of logic.
Could I demonstrate how a reductio has to use them in order to show that they're false? Well, you would need to have some definition of true and false, right. And if you're going to engage in reasoning, if you're going to construct an argument, reasoning is predicated on identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle being true. And in order to say that they're not true, you would first have to either begin by assuming that they're true, and then do a reductio, or you'd have to come up with some alternate mechanism by which we can reason and demonstrate why that reasoning should be preferable.
I've heard it like you could say that they're either false or not false, but not both or not neither. Like there's ways in which they're not merely deemed true, but they are, sort of true.
Well, one of the things is that when you take the three of them as a package, you're basically describing a single Venn diagram with a single container. And so everything is either in the container or not in the container. Whether you want to label that as true and not true or false and not false, none of that matters. The identity and non-contradiction excluded middle don't care about what label is on the container. They basically just describe how you're either in the container or not. And so I'm unaware of any way that you could take the absolutes and put them in the container that it describes without beginning with that container. You'd need a whole other way of addressing it. And the only way people have tried to show, for example, that I'm aware of, that there are some situation or scenario where they wouldn't be true, every instance of that has begun with the same sort of reasoning that describes this. So,
even in the very act of referring to something, you have to give it a metaphysical variable. You have to be able to talk about something, you refer to something.
Yeah.
You already give it some kind of category, and then you distinguish it from what it's not. So it's operating at a meta level. That's the way in which I liked how you described it, I think, on one episode. Yep. That it's sort of already implicit, So, but yeah, I mean, just to finish up, that was pretty much it. They're not just true, but they're what truth and falsehood themselves, depend upon. They're like meta truths, I suppose. They're truths about the nature of truth.
Yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate the call. We're going to move on to some other callers. Take care.
Right. Thank you.
Sure. All right, we've got Sean in New Zealand. You're on the air.
Hey Matt, hey John, how's it going?
Hey, Sean. Good.
Doing well.
Awesome. So I got this bit of Christian propaganda in my mailbox the other day, and it says that God is not only loving but holy, and then beside holy in bracket it's got perfect. Now, would you say that that's generally the way that Christians would attribute the word holy, or are they just trying to make it seem more preferable to be a Christian because holy is so-called perfect?
Oh, the propaganda is essentially equating holy with perfection?
Yes.
Yeah, and I really only see that as a propaganda technique because it's kind of ingrained in us, this idea, I guess, that holiness somehow equates to perfection or perfect goodness. So in classical theism, where you have a God that is all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-good, this is true within Christendom to varying degrees, depending on what the specific doctrines are. But yeah, it just seems to be kind of like a beginning presupposition that holiness is equivalent or similar to perfection or goodness. And I would actually want somebody to kind of define and describe what they mean by holiness, and then evaluate whether or not this equates to goodness or perfection.
Yeah, that's my thoughts exactly. Like, it's just frustrating. I got 3 of them in one day that basically all say the exact same thing, but in slightly different ways. So you end up looking at them because they look different, but they all have this basic same things in them. And it's just frustrating that they just mail everyone that sort of propaganda. And yeah,
well, you see much the same thing with words like worship. If you've grown up in a culture where you've been taught that worship is a good thing, this idea, and in some contexts, what they mean by worship might be where you're talking about respect and reverence if it is in fact earned, but this idea of worship, of caring about some idea or individual, be they a deity or something supernatural or natural, to the point where they cannot be wrong, where there's no justification for not worshiping. And I've said before, if the Bible is an accurate description of a God that exists, I will fully accept that God exists if the case is made, but that doesn't mean I'll worship him. And I'm also on record as saying that I think the very idea of worship is kind of repugnant, and that any being who might be worthy of that sort of veneration and respect would never demand or expect that kind of reverence and worship.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of like going up to a homeless person and being like, so you're hungry and I have a sandwich for you, but first you have to lick my feet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're not allowed to question why you have to lick the feet, because I'm clearly better than you.
Yeah.
And the very, very pronouncement that you are better than them while you're expecting them to lick your feet is a demonstration that you are in fact not better than them by any standard that I would consider good.
I agree.
Cool.
Sean,
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Sean, were these 3 mailings all from the same source, or are there 3 different?
Yeah.
Okay, they're just.
They have a website, questionsonlife.com.
They just really.
They all suggest to go there to further your because they're trying to offer a gift of Jesus and God, but you have to be willing to receive said gift. So to receive it, you need to go to their website to then praise God and tell him that you're sorry and you love him.
And when you say you got these in your mailbox, are you talking about an email or an actual physical?
Physical mailbox and my actual address.
I think one of the things that I like the most about these is that they're spending money to print and mail things. I like it for 2 reasons. There are some of these organizations that I don't find to be doing much of anything in the public interest, and so the possibility of bankrupting them on mailers is at least, it might make me smile slightly. But I think it's also useful because many times some of these organizations are doing good things. They're helping to the homeless in the community. They're helping education and other things. And if they're sending out money they're spending money just to proselytize, then I think it's worth pointing out that money would probably be better spent doing something actually useful and even if their church is already or religion is already involved in those other efforts.
Well, and it seems really excessive too. If you're not convinced after the second one, is the third one really going to be the thing that makes the difference? It's like,
yeah, exactly. Like, is there a point in like just flooding you with all the same information? I mean, you've read it, you know it, you're exposed to it already.
right?
Do they need to spend more money on it when they can? Like Matt just said, they could be spending it on more appropriate places, as well as the fact that we already know that there's enough rubbish in the world, like literal rubbish, that we don't need to be adding paper waste and such to the detriment of the world.
There's another aspect of this which I've run across several times, and I know I've mentioned it, and I'm being serious here. This isn't a joke. I can't count the number of times this happened in Australia when I was there, and it happens in the United States, where I've run across somebody out on the street preaching, and they have this, I guess, script which begins with something along the lines of, "Have you heard about Jesus?" Now, I don't think for a second that they're really convinced that they're likely standing on the street in somewhere in the Western world, that they're going to come across someone who's seriously never heard about Jesus. And so it seems to be starting the conversation on somewhat disingenuous terms. But there's another aspect to this, and that is within some views of Christianity, when we talk about the end times, there's a mindset that Jesus can't come back until everyone has heard about him. And so these people who are standing out there aren't so much concerned about convincing you and actually leading you towards salvation as they are in filling their obligation to make sure that everybody heard. Their goal is to make sure everybody hears so we can hurry up and get to the end times and be spirited off to heaven, and not everybody needs to hear because there's a good reason for them to hear and maybe they can be saved. I know they don't tend to think of it that way, but I think if you look at the actions they take, well, it's not up to me to convince you. That's up to the Holy Spirit. They pawn responsibility off to God, which I think is a good idea. Because if you believe that there's a God who has this plan, why does he need me to run around and do his phone dialing for him? Why does he need me to stand on the corner and tell people? And why are there seemingly instructions from these gods to go do the killing on that God's behalf? I go back to the Steely Dan song, "I'm a fool to do your dirty work," and I think it's a little telling that this is what, at least from my perspective, of what I see happening quite often.
Yeah, God doesn't need a PA. He should be his own PA.
Yeah, I don't know why he can't just talk to all of us. On that note, thanks a lot for calling. And, there's a lot of mailers that get sent out, chick tracts and other things. The ones that are fairly standard, especially if you're getting multiples of them, it can be annoying, and it can also be amusing. My wife has quite a collection of theistic propaganda. I was going to say Christian, but we have some outside of that she gathers. If we end up in a church, or I think we were at one of the rest areas one time where there's advertisements for caves and zoos, and here's everything you need to know about Jesus right there in the rest area type thing too. So, but they can be a fun collection. At least it's something to potentially talk about, maybe have some conversations.
Yeah, good conversation starters, definitely.
All right, thanks, Sean. I appreciate it.
Awesome, thanks, guys. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
And I'm not sure if this is typed correctly. Is it Jevon or Levon?
It's Jevon.
Jevon. Sorry. Thanks for waiting. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, how you doing? I want to get to the point. Christian devastation in the black community. I'm feeling it. I see it. I'm in Chicago. I used to live on the south side of Chicago. And I'm not sure what can be done about this, especially when there's 4 churches on one corner in multiple places on the south side of Chicago. I've no longer, with my family, I've pretty much been ostracized on the outside of the family. I've moved into the city. And my point is, what can we do? What can be done? Because I don't think a lot of the atheist community out there understand how deeply the Christian religion, the Christian indoctrination has devastated and destroyed the black community. They just don't understand this. I see it for myself. I lived it for myself. But what can actually be done. I don't know, but I want to put it out there. I want it to be known, and I want to get your thoughts on this because, slavery, number one. I believe that in order to enslave people and get them to do your will, you had to give them something to believe in. And, and otherwise those people would have probably rather have died, but they didn't because they had something to believe in, deliverance or whatever else, And I just think this is all a fallacy, and I think religion has done so much damage to the black community where they can't even pull themselves up out of it because, they have to pray for everything. Everything is prayed for. They believe God is going to deliver this. They believe Jesus is going to pull them out of this poorness. It's not going to happen. The only thing that is going to pull us out of there is if we get our wits to ourselves, get educated, and, and make decisions, one after the other that leads to a better future or leads to a better result. You can't pray for things, but this is so ingrained in my family. It's so ingrained in the people that surround me on a day-to-day basis. It's just starting to destroy me from the inside out, and I do not know how. There are some the black non-believers, non-believers of Chicago. They are here, but we really have no strength. We really have no voice. We can't overcome this indoctrination, this swelling of these mega black churches, Pastor Meeks and stuff like that, who I used to go to before I, converted myself fully to atheism. But why aren't we talking more about this? What can we do?
It's a really complicated situation because, as I pointed out before, the Bible is very clear. It endorses or advocates or permits or allows slavery and regulates it, and it was used in that sense. On the flip side of it, slavery was ended in part because of some vocal Christians who were opposed to it, despite what their Bible says. Religions tend to prey on people's fears, and sometimes they invent particular fears. They have built-in fear. Oh, you have a fear of hell, whether hell is real or not. Let's give you a fear of hell, and the religions will essentially poison people with something because that makes sure that the religion is the only potential escape. It is the only cure to the disease that it has infected you with. It is absolutely terrifying. On the flip side, religions have also been working in charitable fashions and helping to build and support communities. So what I see from my friends who participated, in the black community and in black churches is that you don't want to oversimplify the problem of the religion without recognizing at least that there are a number of people who go there and go to these churches not because they actually believe in a God, not because of any of the reasons that the religion might like, but because this is their social network. This is their chance to interact with people. This is where they may be able to go for aid and assistance. And it seems to me that the solution to that is to, first of all, educate, let people know that this is at least in part what's going on. Organizations, as you mentioned, like Black Nonbelievers, are specifically focused on helping the black community, black churches, people coming out of religions. Your particular ostracizing is something we've heard from a number of different communities, not the black one alone. But I think that we as a secular community need to start doing a better job of filling in the gaps for the needs of people so that people don't feel obligated. Oh, well, the only place where I'm really going to get help is at church. And to educate families so that if somebody in your family doesn't believe as you do, that your first instinct isn't to choose your religion over your relationships and cut them off. And that's a ton of work. And what we need are people like you who've witnessed it firsthand to speak up, to get involved, write articles, write letters to the editor, create blogs, do documentaries, as some of my other friends have done, to point out this harm. Because, and while I appreciate your calling the show, I don't know that I can do anything other than be supportive of those efforts. I think it would be absolutely a horrible strategic move for the pasty old bearded fat white guy to pretend as if he's going to be the white knight savior for the black community. I can't.
Yeah, it's not about that.
I can't get any traction there at all. And so instead, what I'm going to continue to do is support humanism, support rational thought, support skepticism, and support the people who are trying to do that work. People like Mandisa Thomas and others, who are building these communities and reaching out to within these communities to say, hey, guess what? Being black is not synonymous with being Christian, no matter what church you went to or how much you like it. And there are some of us out here who don't fall into this, and there is a place for you to step free of this. It shouldn't be in an ideal world, if a bad set of beliefs or a bad organization is luring people in with candy, it shouldn't be the case that you have to also give those people candy in order to get them away from it. But the actual reality is that you might need to do something like that just to get enough attention to show them how they're being manipulated. And you have to do all this while keeping in mind that while we can view religions in a manipulative sense, it's not like every preacher and every church is out for money or power. These people genuinely, as far as we can tell, and in most cases, genuinely believe what they're saying, and they genuinely believe they're helping people. It's not like the pastors are this top tier that are lying to people about the prayer they need. Most pastors come right up out of the pew at some point, and most of them aren't getting rich. So there's no easy answer, but I think you've demonstrated what needs to happen a lot more, and that is for people like you to speak out, and for all of the rest of us to say, yes, this.
Well, on that note, I don't want to hold on, and I appreciate your.
Well, I think John had.
But I do want to. Okay, go ahead, John.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to add, keep doing what you're doing and speaking out. I think Matt hit the nail on the head when he said people are looking for community, and if they find it in the church, they gravitate towards the church, whether they actually buy every bit of dogma that's being pushed there. So
they might buy none of it.
Or none of it.
And we already know from the Clergy Project that there are active pastors in the pulpit who don't believe, and they feel trapped because they now have no skill set with which to go get another job. They've been preaching, in many cases, from the time they were children. This is all they know. And so they've joined the Clergy Project, and what some of them are doing are changing the way they give sermons so that they're far more about community, about secularism. And I tell you, I think a good example of somebody who kind of got rich, got very, very rich doing this is Joel Osteen. Because I have family members who are fundamentalists who look at Joel Osteen and say, I can't even see how anybody could think this person is Christian. Because
that guy makes me sick.
He's essentially a motivational speaker. How often does he mention Jesus? How often does he point to Scripture? I mean, it seems to be like a matter of convenience, and he seems to be a power of positive thinking, motivational speaker who now has a megachurch filling up what used to be a basketball stadium.
Yeah, but his basis is using religion, and that's the problem. I go just to say this. I know I called in and I'm talking about the black community, but I wanted to say this: we are all human. There's only one race, and it's called human. Other than that, there's different cultures amongst the human race, and black is one of the cultures of the human race, just as white as anybody else. So I want to just, if you can't allow me, all those black people that's out there that can hear this, please join Facebook, join some of our communities, join some type of, atheist community and reach out for us, because we're trying to grow, we're trying to become something more than just stuck in the dogma of religion and in the indoctrination world. And we need to raise our next generation better than that, all for all human beings, all people, and for the world. So that's all I want to say. Thank you, Matt, and for the last 2 years. All right, I'm out.
Thanks, Jevon. And I'll give you a hearty amen.
Yeah, I was going to say that too. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep being an example to the black community and to others that there's another way. I confess I've never really understood why the black community embraced Christianity so much when it was used as a justification for centuries for slavery.
Because another portion of it was also used as a justification in slavery.
It was a little bit, but...
And it's because of the community support. It's one of those things where you can't always be aware of somebody else's condition, and so when I've actually spoken to people who are in these, they will caution me left and right. make sure you're careful about what you say, because in many cases you're talking about single black mothers who have this one resource as their entire community, and a lot of them couldn't give a rat's ass about, you know, the doctrinal stuff.
Yeah, they need help. And if we can work on ways that non-believers can provide the same community and the same help and the same social support and networking,
Or better.
at least as good.
Because then we're not offering you a ham sandwich, but making you listen to a sermon first.
But churches have a built-in advantage too. They're exempt from all taxes. And we're nonprofit, we're exempt from some taxes, but when you're a church, you're exempt from all taxes. So they can do it a lot more cost effectively than we can, unfortunately.
And they've been doing it longer. And the positive takeaway from all of this is that we're seeing a gradual change in the makeup, at least in the United States, where the nones, the NONEs, the people who don't ascribe to any religion, are increasing at a rate that outpaces most religions, where church attendance is on the drop, on the decline, where the conversations about this are becoming more frequent, more public, and where you have the Reason Rally coming up, this summer, and there will be plenty of people there. Yes, we'll have a lot of celebrities who are identifying, as secular and supporting Reason, et cetera. But we know from the Clergy Project, from Recovering from Religion, from just getting phone calls into the show, the amount of email we get from people who are in troubling situations. The world is changing, and the state of affairs for most religions in the United States is not in a particularly good spot. The internet has massively, the kind of de facto quote is that the internet is the place where religions come to die, because of the impact of more information, more conversations. And I think that, while I share his frustration, I have an incredibly optimistic and positive outlook for the future, at least in some regards.
Yeah.
Whether or not we save ourselves from destruction or who we vote for, et cetera, but as far as reason winning out and evidence, a reality-based worldview, I think it's inevitable that that's what happens. It can be incredibly frustrating that it hasn't happened instantly. As soon as, hey, I recognize this, why can't everybody else? More conversations.
Yeah, we're getting there.
So we got, there we go. John on line 4, thanks for waiting.
Hey, how you guys doing?
Doing pretty well.
John?
Right on. I'm a fan of the show. I just discovered you guys like maybe 2 months ago or something like that. I've been watching you guys in retrospect. So good job. Thanks.
You sound like Stephen Wright on the phone.
Do I really?
A little bit. I mean, if you were to do Stephen Wright jokes, I think I might have bought it.
I could probably play the guy on the couch from Half Baked because he doesn't really say anything in the movies. So that would be like the easiest role ever.
So what did you have for us?
Well, there was 2 things that I wanted to. I'm a former Christian, I guess you could say, but probably mostly because of you guys. There's a few things. I know you're a former fundamentalist Christian, so I imagine you're probably familiar with C.S. Lewis and his kind of apologetic work.
Yeah.
But he had an argument regarding the intelligent design I find kind of compelling. I'm not calling with any sort of agenda or anything like that. I just wanted to get your guys' opinion on something he said. It was stop me if you've heard this, but it was supposing that there's no intelligence behind the universe or no designer.
Yep.
And that would mean that nobody designed his brain for the purpose of thinking, which would mean that any sort of thought that he had or that we would have would just be atoms inside of our skull happening for.
And that's where he makes a terrible mistake.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a fallacious, and I've talked about C.S. Lewis before. Actually, if you go to patreon.com/atheistdebates, that's where I tend to put up my own apologetics and counter-apologetics. I have the argument from design, and I believe that I may have mentioned C.S. Lewis in that one. If not, I've talked about him elsewhere. This particular idea that if we begin with this understanding that there wasn't a purpose to the universe that resulted in my mind, then that means the thoughts taking place in my mind are merely just happenstance. It's just atoms colliding, and there's nothing about it that ties. And that is demonstrably false. Because
in what way?
It is false in the sense that we know that the patterns in my mind correlate with facts about reality. and that some people are better able to construct ideas that correlate with reality. We can compare them. I can get feedback from John. Now, granted, we are assuming that I am not, in fact, the only mind, but as long as we're going to have a conversation, I think it's probably a good assumption to start with. But I can, if I have this understanding of reality, I can talk to John, I can talk to other people to get independent verification, and then we can try to see how consistent is my internal model of reality with the reality I experience. And I don't see any demonstration that the only way that could come about is if there was a brain that was designed to do this. Because when we talk about evolution, when we look at the broad spectrum of life that's on the planet and the varying ability, varying cognitive abilities there, our close relatives in the primates have functions that are similar to ours. They, we've demonstrated, ideas of fairness and stuff like that. And as you move around to the other species, they have different levels of comprehension. And so what seems to almost be happening is Lewis and others almost want to ignore this broad spectrum of cognitive ability, single in on ours, and claim that there's something special about it, that it couldn't have happened any other way than by the accidental forces of nature, or that it couldn't have happened by the accidental, that there must have been some sort of intelligent designer. I don't see any justification for that. First of all, even if we had no evidence about how consciousness arises, about how cognitive abilities could have formed, now let's remove all those other brains that they want to remove, and let's even remove the billions of years of history of Earth, or the hundreds of millions of years of evolution that directly pertain to our cognitive functions. Let's remove all that and just say, here I am, I'm able to think. How did I get to the point where I'm able to think? How do you make the argument that not only the best explanation, but the only explanation is that some supernatural, all-powerful thinking being specifically created it for this purpose? You don't have enough information to conclude that, and we have no way of investigating the supernatural, so we can't confirm that the supernatural exists at all, and we can't confirm that it interacts with the natural world at all. So when we're looking at what is a potential explanation, the supernatural hasn't been demonstrated as actual or probable or even possible. So we don't get to appeal to it. And the best explanation would, at this point, given the scenario I've constructed, is I have no idea why I'm able to think. And when, go ahead.
So, sorry, I was going to say, given that we have no idea, so we can only draw conclusions based on our reason or by logic, or by reason, essentially. Don't you think it would be a sensible or reasonable conclusion, not necessarily a conclusion, but a hypothesis of how it came about, is that our brain was designed for thinking by some sort of I guess we don't have to call it God, but some sort of designer or some sort of force that is being some sort of metaphysical force. Do you agree that it could be a reasonable conclusion? Not necessarily of it could have only happened this way, but it just that possibly it could have happened this way.
I understand why people would find it compelling to perhaps offer that as a hypothesis. My question is, how do you test it, and is that hypothesis falsifiable?
True enough. Okay.
And if it's not, then it becomes a useless proposition until such time as we can test it.
Okay. All right. Okay, cool.
I guess I don't understand C.S. Lewis's argument either. It's so, what if your consciousness is atoms moving around in your brain, physical atoms? How is that an argument against
or for design?
Or for design? If it's just atoms,
it would be if I could use his own words, it would be upset, to trust one's own consciousness, not having it been designed by any higher being. To use his own words, it would be like upsetting a jug of milk and hoping that it would splash itself into a map of London.
Yeah, it is by definition an argument from ignorance, and in this case, kind of almost an argument from incredulity. And his analogy about splashing the milk and thinking it would, form correctly, denies what we know about evolution and the length of time and the processes that take place. So if you begin with a simple like a brain, and this is going to be an abstract and definitely doesn't map to what we know from evolution. But let's say we begin with a simple brain that can only tell whether, or is in a position where it needs to tell is it light out or is it dark out? That's all. That's the only thing. Is it light or is it dark? The brains that get that right are the ones that are likely to go on to produce offspring. Just for that single concept. And we have animals in the animal kingdom who basically, that's their only concern. Am I exposed in the light or am I concealed in the darkness? And this becomes, for some animals, the primary factor in determining are they safe? And it's the most important decision they can make. From there, it's just a matter, and I know that, like I said, this is abstract and incorrect. From there, it's just a matter of, hey, let's add one more thing to it, and now it's two things we got to worry about. And eventually, you don't have to follow this through to its conclusion of yes, but I can hold millions of thoughts in there, because it's not the thoughts that evolution selects for; it's the processes. It's this brain has received some input. Is it able to consistently make predictions about what it can expect acting on that input? And it doesn't have to be crazy complex.
And it's an iterative process. It's not it's like that stupid argument about, if a tornado goes through a junkyard, will it accidentally form a 747? That's not how evolution works. So it's coming up with this absurd analogy that has no bearing on what's actually going on, and then saying, see how silly that is? It can't possibly be true. Well, no, because your analogy is stupid.
It's one of the situations where if we knew nothing, our answer would be, I don't know. And yet we don't know nothing. We know a lot of things. And what we've learned is more consistent with the facts that we've discovered about evolution. And the hypothesis that you had suggested, that there was an intelligent designer, that has had no support. And there doesn't seem to be any way to get any support for it. How do you investigate the supernatural? How do you confirm what it can or can't do? And it can't be a reasonable, accepted hypothesis if you can't test it. So,
I see. Okay. Well, I have one more question. I've heard you say several times in your show that knowledge is a subset of belief.
Yeah.
Okay, if I'm understanding that right, it means that belief depends. You need knowledge in order to believe.
No, that would be belief as a subset of knowledge. Here's a set of beliefs. Some subset of that are the beliefs that we identify and label as knowledge.
Okay, could you explain it in more layman's terms? I guess I'm not quite understanding. Like when you say knowledge is a subset of belief, like what exactly do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I don't know if you can see the screen, but if we were to take if we were to take every belief you have and put it into a bag, just write them down. Yeah. I believe this, I believe this, I believe this, and put them in a bag, and label that bag beliefs. And then we have a second bag that we're going to label knowledge. Is there anything you could put into the second bag that isn't already in the first? Is it possible to know something but not believe it?
I think, well, I've always been under the understanding that knowing something eliminates belief. In the sense of, like, if I were to tell you, tell
me something you know.
There is snow outside of my house right now that I'm looking at.
Okay. Do you also believe that that's the case?
Well, I can't really believe that because I know it. If let's say I didn't look outside, and somebody told me
Belief is just, I accept that this proposition is true or likely true. That's it.
Okay, all right. But I was under the understanding that belief, like the very nature of belief, was ignorance. Like if I were to say to somebody, like, there's a dead raccoon in your backyard, then they hadn't been in their backyard, they would either have to believe me or not believe me. Based on whatever reason, they would have to believe me or not believe me. But as soon as they were to go into the backyard and see that there is, like, let's say they went in there, they saw a dead raccoon there, there's really no room left for faith.
They don't. I'm not talking about faith. I'm not talking about faith.
Belief.
So you tell me there's a dead raccoon in my yard, and I could either believe you or not believe you. Okay? Let's say you tell both of us, John and I, there's a dead raccoon outside, and I believe you and John doesn't. And we go outside and we investigate, and there is, in fact, a dead raccoon out there. Now, we know that to be the case, given this version of knowledge we're using. I believed it before. I still believe it. John didn't believe it before, and now he does.
I see.
That's
Okay,
how.
so,
That's
like-
how I
So
understand it.
philosophically, knowledge often gets defined as justified true belief. Essentially, here's the bag full of beliefs that I have. I'm going to go through them and I'm going to say, I believe this, but my confidence level isn't particularly high. I don't have good justification for this. I haven't investigated to determine if it's true. I believe it. I may have good reasons, but I'm not going to say that I know this. Quite often, when somebody says, I know something, they're not giving you any useful information. What they're really saying is, I really, 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 really believe this. They're expressing a confidence level. Now, faith, your belief could be for good reasons or bad reasons. I might believe you that there's a raccoon outside, but my reasons could be bad. I could just take it on faith that you're telling me the truth. Or I could smell something and put together pieces of evidence to where I've concluded that your claim is reasonable, so I'm willing to accept it, but I'm not sufficiently convinced, and my belief isn't sufficiently justified that I would say I know it. That's the distinction.
Exactly, and that's what I'm trying to get at here, is that like the very nature of belief would have, well, and I don't want to get into anything like with the meaning of words or like semantics or anything like that, but I was always under the impression that the very nature of belief itself was ignorance, that until you know something, you would either have to believe or disbelieve something, and then as soon as you know it, there's really no room left for belief. Do I just have this?
As soon as you know it, you either start believing as well, or you continue to believe. Belief just means acceptance of a proposition is true. Knowledge is
likely true.
Yeah, or likely true. Yes, thank you. Or knowledge is some belief that is true and justified under the justified true belief, or more commonly in the colloquial sense, it is a belief that you are very, 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 very convinced about. And I've argued that probably the most useful definition of knowledge is a belief that one is sufficiently convinced of that it would be worldview altering to find out it was wrong. This relies a little too much on the individual confidence level, but this is why there's a whole field of philosophy around epistemology. What do we know? How do we know it? What is knowledge? And to get back to the caller we had earlier on, do we have any pathway to truth? So
so I just that's my understanding of belief too, and I think faith, like you mentioned earlier, faith is probably a better word for that concept of believing something with for no good reason, or for no that you don't have any justification for. And then I would agree, once you look at the dead raccoon in your yard, you no longer have faith that it's there, you now have knowledge that it's there. But yeah, I think belief is still there even when you have the knowledge.
And it gets confusing too, and I know you wanted to stay away from semantics. I'll just toss this out. That we're talking about knowledge in the philosophical context. There's another knowledge thing, which simply means familiarity with. I know John. That's not not an assessment of whether or not John is true. It's using the word know to say I am familiar with and acquainted with John.
English is a wacky language.
It is. English is an incredibly terrible language in some respects. And right down to spelling of things.
In French, there's two different words for no that apply to like both of those things that you're both talking about. And there are two different words. In English, we have just one word to represent the two meanings, which is, English is weird like that.
All right. Well, I appreciate the call, John. Thanks for hanging out with us.
I appreciate you taking my call. Have a good rest of the night.
You too. Thanks, John.
All right. And we've got Greg in, is it California? Or is it?
Hello.
Hey, Greg, how are you?
I'm great, Matt. How are you?
Doing pretty well.
Good. So, I have a question for you. This is probably more on the historical basis than theological, but, I've listened to and read some of the works of Bart Ehrman, the biblical scholar.
Yeah.
And, he tells, a lot of other people have told stories of, Jesus, and, we have the virgin birth and, the miracles performed, the resurrection. So this kind of story has been told about Jesus, but also about other people and around the same era or before in ancient Rome. So, and those times in antiquity. So I was wondering, why do you think that the Jesus story picked up traction, and even probably despite quite a bit of resistance, both from Rome itself and the authorities, and then later on just people being, I suppose, skeptical of these things. That story, however, somehow proliferated and grew, into I suppose you say what it is today, with being the largest followed religion. So,
well,
what do you think it was? I mean, about that particular story compared to all the other similar ones that allowed it to, gain traction in the world and proliferate?
Why is Justin Bieber so popular?
I think that people think he is charismatic and sings well, I guess.
Yeah. So people are attracted to certain things. If you have put together a pretty good mythos attached to a figure, I mean, we've seen these, you mentioned we've seen these stories before. Why would one catch on more than another? Well, maybe there are aspects of this story that resonated with more people at the right time. And while there was certainly opposition, there was also considerable support, right down to, the 325 AD, oh gosh, I'm blanking on the name, but the support from Constantine and others in governments. There were wars fought where there were differences in religion. There were essentially religious or Christian board meetings where they voted on who was Orthodox and who wasn't, what was going to get into the Bible and what wasn't. In some cases, it benefited due to significant figures in government authority helping to spread it around. And in other cases, it grew because it felt good to certain people and it resonated with certain people and they told it to people it resonated with. I don't know that we could ever say, here is the reason why this story became popular and some other didn't. All we can do is point to a number of different factors. But at no point does the popularity of the story tell us anything at all about whether or not it's true. And I think you can also look at how it hasn't necessarily spread into other regions where their stories that perhaps existed earlier or that resonated better with those people. I mean, if you go to Israel, it's not like the Jesus narrative particularly has captured this country where it essentially started. And if you go out into the Arabic world where there's Muslim and Hindu and Buddhist traditions, yes, it can make inroads there, but it didn't flourish there. And so it flourished with this group of people who, by the way, happen to be the descendants, the modern people where it flourished are the descendants of people who were very imperialistic in going out and taking over places. And this is where the power was. You could say, the reason it flourished was because it's the one that's true, or that God favored those people. But then you'd have to explain why gods have seemingly also favored other people at different times in different ways. And so at the end, there's no way to discern that the likely reason is that it has anything to do with whether or not it's true. And as we see things like church attendance declining, the number of people identifying with a particular religion may be on the decline, what we know of the history of religions is that they tend to die out and fade off. The religion that used to dominate the world at one point is now almost a joke. That who believes in Thor other than an Avengers fan? I know that I get emails from them, people saying, "Oh, I believe in the ancient Greek gods or the ancient Roman gods," but they're clearly not popular anymore, and yet at one time they were significant with the people who controlled a good chunk of the world.
I do think that the main reason.
Yeah, well,
I do think the main reason that it got traction, though, was the state support and the power that went along with it. I think if Constantine hadn't done that, it would have looked totally different. As well as the European governments during the Middle Ages and all that. That really was the reason it took off, in my opinion.
There's also a clever aspect to it, which I've talked about before, which is when you go through like the Sermon on the Mount and other things, there's a lot in Christianity that encourages the view that you will be persecuted, that you will be victimized. Most of the Gospels talk about this idea of persecuted for my name's sake and everything else. And so if the process by which we get rid of other religions that we don't like is to kill the people in those religions, then a religion that basically convinces people they're going to come after you. You are going to need to be martyred. You are going to be persecuted. Then as soon as they start coming after you, that tends to give the impression that the religion predicted this and therefore it must be right. Hey, we knew people were going to think we're terrible. And I think that's something not to be overlooked, because we cite a lot of Christian persecution in the early 1st, 2nd century, and beyond as well. But in every situation that we can investigate, they used the fact of that persecution to bolster the belief of the people in it. The same as you would with trying to create martyrs in Islam through this mechanism. In other religions, we create martyrs by convincing them that the more devout they are, the more the world is going to want to take them out, and that becomes a kind of a self-reinforcing prophecy or delusion.
Yeah, I think probably actually the first couple hundred years are maybe what I'm referring to more, in that it does look to me like Jesus was an apocalypticist more than anything else, and that when you look at any other references outside of the Gospels, there's not all that many references to Jesus. So it seems unlikely, if you had a bet on it, just if you could go back to the day and bet on it, whether or not that kind of a following would have grew to the point where Constantine adopted Christianity as the religion of Rome. So I'm just curious about this first few hundred years and how it would be possible that story over all the other ones got traction with the population. That was my question.
Yeah, and I'm not convinced that it actually was getting a ton of traction in those early years. And I would agree with you. If you didn't know how things turned out, you might be tempted to say this is a really bad bet. How many other bad bets turned into something that bore fruit? How many good bets didn't? And this is a problem of trying to reach a conclusion based on insufficient information. And even if it seemed outlandish, like there's just no way that a religion with these particular doctrines could ever gain traction, the fact that it still doesn't tell you anything about whether or not the doctrines are true.
Yeah, I agree with that part for sure.
All right.
Okay, well, you guys do a great job there and a valuable service. I really appreciate all the shows and the time you put into it. Thanks so much.
Sure.
Thank you,
Thanks, Greg.
Another example of that martyred would be the Mormon Church,
right?
Where they had this insular community that was very persecuted by the rest of society, and that lends a certain amount of cohesion to the group and vehemence, I guess, to further its mission. So, something in more modern times.
Yeah, and it tends to be the case, I would suspect, that as long as that vehemence doesn't strongly put them at odds with somebody that is of a bigger power base, that as long as you're basically pushing out proportional to the strength of your base, then you can do that. As soon as you push too far. So cult leaders will use this sort of isolation mentality of making sure you need to depend on us. And I've said before, and I agree, and I don't think it's original to me, that cult is the label that the big church puts on the little church. To me, they're all cults. I know the preferences to use the word sects or denomination, and that not all cults, even under my definition, are created equal. They're not all equally harmful, and they're not all proselytizing. For example, why didn't Judaism become more popular? Because Judaism has this idea within it that you need to be born into the house of Israel. There's actually obstacles in place in order for you to convert to it. I've never in my entire life have I had my doorbell rung, and I've never heard of anybody having the doorbell rung by someone saying, hey, I'm a Jew and I'm here to try to convince you to be one too. That just doesn't really happen. I'm sure now I'll get an email from somebody who had that experience. That's what happens when you kind of generalize. But so we got about maybe 25 minutes left in the show. I wanted, as a reminder, after the show's over, we get together and go to dinner, and I believe, and the booth can correct me, that we're still going to Threadgill's. It says right there, Threadgill's, 6416 North Lamar. We'll be on the air until about 6 p.m. Central, and probably over there by 6:15, 6:30, as some of us finish up the cleanup here. We're going to go on to Sarah. Thanks for waiting.
Hi.
Hi, Sarah.
I I just kind of, I don't know, I've watched the Atheist Experience a couple times in the past year. I'm a Christian, but I'm kind of questioning, I guess. I know you were studying to be a pastor, I believe.
Yeah, that was the goal.
Well, I mean, I don't know if you've experienced this, but I'm kind of thinking I may be an atheist, but I keep having, anytime I kind of think like that, I keep feeling like, I don't know if it's guilt or if it's fear, but kind of,
yeah. So
I mean, like, I'm trying to figure out if it's the Holy Spirit or if
right.
I'm, you know.
This is exactly what I was talking about, this idea that if religions have a built-in protection, it helps keep you there. And if you've been taught from birth that you need to have this particular walk with Christ, and that doubts are evil, and the doubts are the devil's way of trying to get in, then when you begin to have doubts, even no matter how reasonable they are, there is the possibility that you're going to begin to feel guilty and anxious. And is God trying to convict you with something with the Holy Spirit? Are you being punished, for this? Is someone trying to, is God trying to nudge you in the right direction? At one point, actually my falling away point when I found my way free from Christianity, my goal was to become a minister. My goal was to do what I thought God wanted me to do in helping spread the word and lead people to Christ. And as I started this process of falling away, every time I would find something, read something that an atheist wrote, or even that somebody wrote in another religion about what was wrong with Christianity, I would say, oh, that's not right. And then I would go off and study, and, well, maybe it's kind of right. Well, yeah, maybe it is right. I had lost my job and everything else. I had been convinced as a teenager that God wanted me to preach, and so members of my family were convinced as well. And I didn't want to do that. I was terrified of public speaking. I didn't want to, it didn't feel right. And I thought, okay, so I joined the Navy for 8 years, I worked in tech for a number of years, and then it all got taken away. And my immediate reaction is, this is God punishing you for not becoming a preacher like he told you to when you were a teenager to. And so that's what put me on the path. It was, I wasn't looking for a way out. I wasn't looking for, I was convinced that what I believed was true and real. When people call and say, look at the trees, and we laugh, I was a look at the trees type of believer. This was just intuitive. It seemed obvious. My entire life had been surrounded by all the people who believed the same things I did. And I don't want to be the one who's ostracized. I don't want to be, my uncle was a medical doctor and a missionary for a number of years. He was the most educated and spiritually wise person on one side of our family. And when he found out that I was an atheist, he called me. And what went through my head was, wow, this is going to be the biggest test ever, because here's this is it. This is the family's hallmark representation of a really good Christian, and he's incredibly well read and educated on all of this. This is my test. And, pass or fail, I could almost view this as a challenge directly from God. And then he offered up Pascal's wager, and my heart just sank, because it didn't prove to me that there was no God, but it certainly demonstrated that this individual who I revered had no better understanding of God than I did, and as a matter of fact may have had a worse understanding of the subject matter. And people will write me sometimes and say, I know that God's going to do a powerful work in your life and you're going to come back to the fold stronger. Or they'll present an argument. And what I've told a number of them is, you believe that God's real and that he wants me to know that he's real. I tried desperately to confirm this. That was my only goal. And you come to me and you offer the same bad arguments and the same flawed reasoning. What I'd like you to do is go off and talk to God and ask God what you should say to me. Because if God tells you to say something, or you are convinced that God has told you to say this, and it is a fallacy-ridden, horribly evidenced argument, then I'll know either that this God is less reasonable than I am and less understanding of reality than I am, or that what you think you're hearing from God is really just your inner dialogue. And when I started recognizing this over and over again, any lingering guilt or concerns that God was convicting me vanished. Because if there is a God, I don't know what would change my mind. But if there is a God, that God knows exactly what would change my mind, should be capable of doing it. And if he cares to have a relationship, then why should I have to learn countless dead languages and sit around doubting myself and engaging in debates and looking through arguments and trying to find hidden meanings? Why can't he just say, hey, I'd like to have a relationship with you? And any God who would condemn someone for not believing when they haven't done their due diligence to encourage that relationship isn't a God worthy of that relationship. And while he may be able to squash me like a bug, I will be squashed in the not arrogant, but demonstrably reasonable conviction that I'm a better human being, morally and intellectually, than the person that would punish me for that.
Yeah, and I understand that. It's just kind of, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me, like on a logical level, but then I feel like, well, that's when they tell you, well, your faith comes in. You know, God's ways aren't our ways. Like, we don't understand the way he works, and, you know, sometimes, like, through us just trusting him, it's like a learning experience, or you're going to become blessed, like, through, like,
so let's say you're God, and you create a bunch of people, and you create them so that they aren't capable of understanding you. Whose fault is that? How can you fault the creations that you made for their inability to understand you? This is my thing. I'm not saying there is no God. I'm just saying if there is a God, there's been no demonstration of this. There's been no attempt to communicate. And any God that would, you know, punish me. I mean, I get what you're saying. Is there any belief that you couldn't continue or feel compelled to maintain out of fear of consequences that are asserted?
Were you asking me a question?
Oh, it was somewhat rhetorical. Essentially, the sort of guilt and fear of potential consequences that you're talking about.
Yes.
That is inconsistent with the God I believed in, a God of love, a God who wanted to, you know, to have a relationship with people. But if that kind of God exists, I wouldn't want anything to do with him anyway. And I know that doesn't resonate with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to acknowledge. I just want to acknowledge, Sarah, that your fear and doubt is real, and I know it's difficult to kind of reason yourself out of fear and doubt, and you may just need to sit with it a while, and kind of let it sit for a while and think about it, until you come to a different place or you don't. But
yeah,
it's not an easy thing to let go of stuff that's that deeply ingrained. So I guess I just wanted to acknowledge that it's not as easy as just hearing an argument and saying, oh yeah, you're right. The
very idea that, you know, you're talking to the potential jackass who's been a non-believer and hosting a TV show for a dozen years, and so it's easy for me to dismiss the guilt that I once had or once felt, or the fear that I felt, because I have conquered it. John's absolutely right.
And it took you some time to go through that, same thing, that same process. So,
and the amount of time it takes can be different for different people.
Yeah.
But I would say that irrespective of what your actual beliefs are, the fact that you care enough to think about it and are understanding, the subject matter and how you feel about it, you have to weigh that against the beliefs as well. But at the end of the day, you can only believe as your conscience dictates, as you only believe the things that you're convinced of. And I definitely would encourage you to not be very hard on yourself. If it's true, if the beliefs that you have are true, then you're doing absolutely the right thing. And if they're false, and this is the protective mechanisms that are the result of indoctrination, then it's also not your fault that you're experiencing these sorts of things. And you're not remotely alone, which is why we have organizations like Recovering from Religion, which is why psychologists like Marlene Winnell are diagnosing and treating religious trauma syndrome from people who have been, have found their way out of religion and yet still. I've heard from atheists who wake up 50 years later with a nightmare about a hell, because that's what they were indoctrinated with as a child.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the other thing. I question, do I really believe in the first place, or is it just fear alone? Because you do wake up and you worry, like, well, not everybody wakes up, but, like, I still worry about hell. And it's
Do you worry about the hell of other religions?
No.
That's all I wanted to say. Just consider that along with it.
Okay. All right, well, thanks. I guess that's really all I had to say.
Sure. And by all means, call back. We'll try and answer things. We're not necessarily pretending to have the answers to questions, and everybody's process is different. There are the organizations you can reach out to, and the Recovering from Religion even has a hotline, and you don't have to be an avowed atheist dealing with something to call that hotline. You can just be, I'm not sure what I am, or maybe I still believe, or I'm doubting, or am I experiencing this anxiety over it. And there are people there that'll talk to you.
Okay. All right, well, thanks.
Sure. Thanks for calling.
Thanks for calling.
Yep. Bye.
Bye-bye. So yeah, we got full lines and about 14 or so minutes left on here. Did you look through the screening to see if there's somebody you wanted to talk to?
Oh, probably Bernard or Brian.
All right, we'll go with Bernard next. Thanks for waiting in London, Ontario.
Yes, hello. Hello.
Hi.
Yes.
How are you?
I'm good. You guys?
Great.
That's good. That's good. I was wondering, because Matt was alluding or saying that he agreed with evolution. Would that be correct?
Well,
what does that mean?
I'm not quite sure agreed with evolution. So the fact that, if evolution is defined as the change in allele frequency over time, this is a fact that we need an observation.
Oh, no, not that evolution. No. Not
okay.
Micro. No, we're talking
okay.
a sort of monkey went to a man.
Yeah. So we have the observable fact of allele change in allele frequencies over time, which is the foundation for evolution. That's the observation. Then we have models that try to explain it. The theory of evolution by natural selection, which is the cornerstone of modern biology, in which we have built a case based on, essentially all available evidence that this model is the one that best accounts for all of the observations.
Okay, rather than going down like a defining micro versus macroevolution path, let's just look at it this way.
They're the same thing.
Agree that there were, like, for example, there was a transitional fossils that appeared. So, for example, this prehistoric fish, let's say Tiktaalik, now is a man. You know what I'm saying? Like, over the process of time.
So you
went from like a fish to like a man.
Every form is a transitional form. I'm a transitional form between my parents and my children, assuming I ever had any. Tiktaalik is one of the one transitional fossil that was found. There are many, many others, and they cover the ground between many different species, and they allow us to map out this process of change. But we're not just relying on fossils. We also have the genetic...
I know you're not just relying on fossils. I understand that.
Okay.
I'm just wondering, which fossil do you claim is transitional? Besides,
all of them. I just said that all of them are transitional.
Oh, okay. So then, how do you use that? So why do you claim they're all transitional?
Because every form is, by definition, a transitional form.
No, right. By what definition?
So evolution is a change in allele frequencies over time, and in species that reproduce, they reproduce with genetic errors, and so your offspring isn't identical to the parents, and their offspring isn't identical to the parents, and so each single event becomes a transition between the parents and the grandchildren.
Every generation
am I less human than my parents then?
Are you less human? No, human is a constructively...
Okay, am I more human than parents?
No, but you're slightly different genetically than your parents.
So then, what kind of change in allele frequency are you saying? Like, I obviously didn't change my species, so
correct. Not every single transitional form is a speciation, And in fact, I'd argue that none of them are in fact a speciation. They are the same.
I have another way of asking the question because it's getting a rough time to ask the question.
Well, it'd be nice if I could finish.
Oh, well, that's okay. I'm just asking a question, right? Like I know all that what's going on. Like
I don't think you do.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. I don't think you do either, right? Like we're on both sides of a coin here, right? I don't.
Yeah, except one of us has all of the science on their side, and the other one doesn't.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree.
Cool.
I know. So okay.
So
if you have the sister, like you were talking, do you say that they're direct ancestors, or do you say they're sister groups? Like, is Tiktaalik a direct ancestor, or is it a sister group?
Of what?
Of our lineage. Like,
I don't know. I would have to actually. I know exactly where it fits into the tree of life, so I don't know if Tiktaalik specifically is a direct ancestor of ours, but somebody does know that from mapping out.
Okay, so I do.
Okay, is it?
Okay, so there are no direct ancestors.
We mean there's no direct ancestors.
Everything is sister because you can't prove that Tiktaalik had offspring.
So essentially, you're arguing that we could just view Tiktaalik as an anomaly, and we have no reason to think that it has offspring.
No, you can't claim it has offspring because you don't know. You weren't there.
I don't know if the specific fossil that we have labeled Tiktaalik had any offspring or not. You're correct.
Oh, right.
But
okay,
I don't.
Exactly.
But the that lineage there, or that perhaps these sisters and cousins of Tiktaalik, which would have been members of the same species, may have had offspring. Some species just die.
Oh, but then are you okay? But then are you saying the sisters of Tiktaalik had the same transitional qualities?
No, I'm saying that they had similar.
Exactly. So who cares about their offspring?
Okay, so here's the thing. We do care if they're offspring because we can trace a genetic lineage. So the fact that, let's say my mom and dad had, we're not identical, but we are of the same species of our parents. Now, hang on, stop interrupting. Species, it tends to be defined as individuals that can interbreed. At some point, when there's enough change in your offspring, you can get to a point where your progeny could no longer have mated with your ancestors. That there's been a sufficient enough accumulation of changes that these can no longer interbreed. Are we on board with that?
Oh, dude. Of course, I'm on board with microevolution all the time.
Okay,
I have no issue
then maybe you should stop saying microevolution because what you seem to be, if you're on board with microevolution and not macroevolution, this distinction you're making, then what you are essentially arguing is that these small changes can't actually accumulate to a point where you now have a new species from the originator. Of course not. How do you know that?
No. Oh, obvious. Like I've been watching.
It's obvious.
For example, they've been breeding horses for 2,000 years.
Oh my gosh!
Let's just say 2,000.
Do you realize that 2,000 years is a blink of an eye? And can you? And by the way, how many species of dogs are there? And can they all interbreed? And can they interbreed with the wolves that were the ancestors?
With micro, I don't have a problem with micro. It's the macro.
I think your understanding of evolution is micro, and
no. The problem is
it's a false
micro. We try to distinguish micro from macro.
Yeah, you keep trying to, and there's no justification for that.
It's a false distinction. It's an exact process.
Anyway,
so if I on the TV screen that you're looking at where you're watching this, if I put out a pixel, that's a micro change, right?
What?
Like we turn off one pixel on the screen, that'd be a micro change, right?
Okay, just keep going. Okay, let's say it is.
And if we turned off the whole screen, that'd be a macro change, right?
Okay, so you're saying a different species is simply turning on and off some switch somewhere.
Well, what I'm saying is this call's over because when I try to come up with an analogy, you want to paraphrase it in a way that ignores the actual context. Of course you do that?
Of course.
Do you think science does that?
Well, no. I know science, for example. Science is that which is knowledge, observation, and experimentation. And, for example, it's never been observed, for example, that a monkey became a man, or
okay. So
or something.
So it's because it's never been observed that a monkey or some other primate turned into a man.
Monkeys don't turn into men.
You think evolution? When evolution in no way says that this monkey turned into this ape ancestor countless generations ago, through many generations leads to this man, and you're saying that we need to ignore all the generations that evolution talks about, and we go directly from monkey to man, and until somebody observes that, it's just not true.
There was no.
This is a case of throwing out all of the evidence that disproves.
Oh no! What? My phone just died. I just ran to grab another phone.
So 1,000, 2,000 generations ago, there was a creature.
No. What I'm saying. Okay, what I'm saying is you so like science.
No,
observe.
Now stop, Bernard. Stop.
So then, are you saying
Bernard?
Bernard. I know you're gonna hang up if I don't stop.
You're done. When you say, "I know you're going to hang up if I don't stop," you bet your ass I'm hanging up. So, if your thing is, Bernard talked about how we never observed a monkey becoming a man. I've never observed a crocodile becoming a duck. It's the crocoduck argument all over again. The thing is...
That's not what evolution says.
Exactly. If evolution does not in any way say this monkey from 2,000 generations ago became this man in this generation over a single observable occurrence, if evolution doesn't say that, then how is it in any way a sound rebuttal to evolution? What evolution says is that these individual changes can add up. This is why I went to the TV screen. A micro put out 1 pixel on your computer screen or TV screen. Change. We just change the color of it, like start to invert the colors. We don't have to turn them off. A macro change would be turning out the whole screen. Well, if you do one at a time, you can get there. Now, the other thing is that's not a great example of evolution, because what evolution is doing is we reproduce. Our offspring are slightly different, but they're not so different that they're a different species from us. There's not this dramatic change. There is a gradual change, and it happens differently, at different rates, with different species. The abundance of diversity of patterns in life. Some species rarely ever change because natural selection is the thing that's acting upon them to determine, hey, are you good enough to survive and create offspring given the current conditions? And as the conditions change, and your environment changes, what the natural selection is selected for, or perhaps better against, changes. And you want, hey, nobody's ever seen a monkey turn into a man, so evolution isn't true. That's not the way it works.
And if we ever did find a fossil somewhere that was half non-human ape and half human, that would disprove evolution.
Yeah.
That's not what evolution would predict at all. So if you did find one of those, then we'd have to reevaluate everything.
Yep. And then you'd have to...
We're not going to.
But in any case, we could throw out the entirety of evolution. Just chuck it right out the window. We don't believe it. What the hell does that have to do with whether or not there's God?
Yeah.
Disproving evolution doesn't somehow prove creationism or intelligent design. It's not the case that the intelligent design proponents and the creationists haven't in any way offered the sort of scientific backing and foundation for their proposed explanation. What they've done is try to attack the current explanation. And the overwhelming majority of the time when they attack that current explanation, they expose their own bias and ignorance, as you've done.
If you disprove evolution, your explanation doesn't just win by default. And why are you calling the Atheist Experience to attack evolution anyway?
Oh, he heard me say that I was supportive of evolution.
Okay, but well, he called in with that. That was his first question.
It's time for you to challenge me on your failed understanding of evolution. I'll say this to Bernard. Your description of evolution, I don't believe. And neither do scientists that study this field. But on that note, we've hit the 90-minute mark. My apologies to the people who didn't get on the show. We actually just lost our monitor here as well. I put it out with my mind. I shut off pixels at once with my mind.
Evolution.
We'll be headed to Threadgills shortly, and we'll be back again next week for another live episode of the Atheist Experience. The information to contact the show will be at the bottom of the screen. You can go to atheist-experience.com. There'll be a link there. Call the show whenever we're on live, and the phone number is there available as well. Thanks to everybody who called in. Our studio audience on the other side of the booth glass. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hi, this is Russell Glasser, host of The Atheist Experience. You know, The Atheist Experience is made possible by volunteers and the generous support of viewers like you. If the promotion of positive atheist culture and separation of church and state are values that you hold, please consider contributing by becoming an ACA member or visiting our product page at evolvefish.com under the Partner tab. Thank you.